You know, it's not every day that you get to talk about a comic that blends punk rock, revolution, and existential dread. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Persepolis. From print to screen, the legends stand. Comic kicks with the upper hand. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is someone who is no stranger to making sense of the chaos life throws at you. My wonderful wife, Bethany Wells.
Hello, everybody.
And this is your birthday week.
It is. My birthday's Thursday. Happy birthday, me.
And so, as per usual, I invite you to pick your own episode. And this was one that you had very strong feelings about.
Well, it's something that I don't know if I would say I had strong feelings about it so much as it was something that I remembered reading when I was in high school or had just graduated high school. And it was one of the first graphic novels that I really read. And it just stuck with me for a pretty long time. And it was an exciting thing to go back to it and rewatch and reread this book.
Yeah, so it was a graphic novel. It was released as two separate books and then eventually put together as one big graphic novel. But let's talk about the movie, or you know what? Let's talk about the title. Why is it called Persepolis? Now, do you know why it's called Persepolis?
It's like a city in Iran.
So it's the ancient capital of the Persian Empire.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it helps symbolize Iran's rich history. Right. And so I believe, I didn't find anything official, but I believe that it allows us to connect Marjane's personal story to the broader story of Iran.
Right.
I
mean, that is a big part of her story is you see the growth and change of her, but you also see it because of the change that Iran goes through at this time.
Yeah, considering this is based on it's based on real events, but it's from a personal story. So, people who don't know Persepolis don't know the personal story. But as usual, we will keep it as, I guess, spoiler-free as possible for this. Not that there's really anything to spoil.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
It's a person's life, which is a fact, and then it's the history of Iran, which is another fact.
Yeah. But let's get into the movie. The movie was released May 23rd, 2007 at the Cannes Film Festival, or Cannes Film Festival. It was then released in the United States on Christmas Day in 2007. What an exciting Christmas movie to go see.
Snuggle up and go see Persepolis.
It is directed by Marjane Satrapi, who both wrote and drew the graphic novel. And then she also co-directed with Vincent Perronad, I assume is how you pronounce his last name. Didn't really find much in terms of what else he had done to mention. It's a short movie. It's only about a little over an hour and a half in runtime.
But it's dense.
Yes, it is a dense hour and a half, and there's definitely a lot cut out from the comic. We'll get into that a little bit more. I did find this very interesting. So before debuting at Cannes, a government-connected group in Iran sent a letter to the French embassy in Tehran. And this is what the letter said. This year, the Cannes Film Festival is an unconventional and unsuitable act. Has chosen a movie about Iran that has presented an unrealistic face of the achievements and results of the glorious Islamic Revolution in some of its parts.
That's an interesting, because it definitely doesn't portray the the revolution in a positive light at all.
Oh, absolutely not. However, in February of 2008, they did allow limited screenings in Tehran. So it was shown. In 2007, in June of 2007, it was removed from the Bangkok International Film Festival. The director of the festival said, "I was invited by the Iranian embassy to discuss the matter, and we both came to the mutual agreement that it would be beneficial to both countries if the film was not shown." He also went on to say, "It is a good movie in artistic terms, but we have to consider other issues that might arise here."
Yep. Now, I am not a political expert, but I do think it's interesting when government agencies look at a movie and say, like, this might not look good for us if we show this movie.
Yeah, I'm sure there's, if you've got certain relationships with Iran, you might have to think about showing a movie like this.
Right.
It was initially banned in Lebanon for being offensive to Iran and Islam. However, that ban was later revoked. In October 2011, it was shown on a private television station in Tunisia.
Huh, so like a public cable access kind of
channel? Yeah, privately owned, so yeah. However, the next day, there was a march on the station, big demonstration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The owner of the station faced charges of violating sacred values and disturbing the public order.
Wow.
And he was found guilty of those charges and ordered to pay 2,400 dinars, which is about $1,700.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah. So, giving an idea of how, heavy this movie is.
Right.
But here in the U.S., it was critically acclaimed. In fact, it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It did not win, however. It lost to Ratatouille. So,
I think they can acknowledge that this is a more important movie, but Ratatouille is a more enjoyable movie.
Yeah, that's it. It lost to Ratatouille.
Okay.
There you go. So a actual French film
versus a fake French
lost
film.
to a fake French film. There you go. All right. Well, let's talk about the actual comic book and how this is all connected.
This is the comic book connection theme.
The movie Persepolis is a direct adaptation of Marjane Satrapi's 2000 autobiographical graphic novel of the same name. Satrapi's unique black and white art style is faithfully recreated in the film, maintaining the stark, minimalist look that defines the comic. This visual style mirrors the contrasts in the story between childhood innocence and the harsh realities of war and revolution. The film, like the graphic novel, captures Satrapi's personal journey from a young girl in Iran with the Islamic Revolution to her life abroad, combining humor, heartbreak, and resilience. By staying true to the comic's visual and emotional tone, the movie transforms her story from the page to the screen while preserving its raw, intimate essence.
I definitely agree. I like that it's in black and white, both the graphic novel and the movie.
Yep.
It really, especially in scenes where they're like, the scene that comes to mind in particular is shortly after the revolution, and it shows her at the school, and they're doing the thing for the martyrs, and all you can really see is their face.
Yeah.
Because the rest of it is black, like negative space because
of the veils.
Of the hijab. The veils. And it's just this very like powerful moment of like, oh, this is reality now, because they've gone from not wearing veils to wearing, there's more of a contrast of the black and the white, and it's just your face now.
Yeah, no, the black and the white does give it a good depth, which is so funny because the whole premise of her story is that things shouldn't be black and white.
Right.
Which is just that's
exactly.
It's just a great way to illustrate
illustrate
it. Yeah, it's a good point. Let's get into the cast. So Marjane is voiced by Sayara Mastriani. That's my best guess on how to pronounce it. The child version at the beginning is voiced by Amistith Frezinac. And again, my apologies to either one of them if I mispronounce those. And then her mother is voiced by Catherine Deneuve, who is Chiara's real-life mother. So it's an actual mother and daughter who are, I believe, both French. And so they voice both the French and the English versions.
Okay.
There's a difference in the cast for the rest, which we'll get to in a minute. But they voiced the two of them. I didn't really know anything that Chiara had done that wasn't French. But I did find out that her mother, Catherine Deneuve, played the Queen in 2001's The Musketeer.
Oh, cute.
So I was like, hey, I've seen that. So I at least wanted to mention that. Now, we of course watched the English version. So we're going to talk about the English cast. And we'll start off with the grandmother, played by Gina Rowlands.
Because when I think of an Iranian grandmother, I think Gina Rowlands.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, Gina Rowlands was the older Allie in The Notebook. She was also in Hope Floats.
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, very white actress, but I think she did a good job as the grandmother.
She did. I will say I do have a problem because the fact that this movie is so much about Iran and there really aren't any Iranian actors in it. I feel like I feel like you're doing a disservice to the story.
Yeah. I almost wonder if that would have even been possible.
At that time, possibly not. But I know you're going to ask me a question later.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where I feel like we're starting to be in a place where it could be possible.
Yeah.
It might not be somebody we know, but it could be a person that.
Well, but we're even talking about this movie was originally French.
Right.
And so even still, it was a French cast.
Right.
And so even if you were to go, they just used English actors for the English version. I mean, yes, but they also kept the original French actress or two actresses. And so it never had an Iranian cast. So, yeah. Continuing on with the Americanized cast, her father is voiced by Sean Penn. I don't think I have to let anyone know, but just to go through a list, I mean, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Mystic River, Milk, Dead Man Walking, I Am Sam.
All of them.
Yeah, Sean Penn, just a quintessential American actor. And then Uncle Anoush is actually voiced by punk rock legend, which I loved that they got a punk rock legend, considering that becomes something that Marjane becomes a fan of. But punk rock legend Iggy Pop, who has been an actor. I mean, he appeared in The Color of Money. He was in Crybaby. And he's appeared in several comic book movies like The Crow City of Angels, Hardware, and Tank Girl. Not good comic book movies, but he's appeared in other comic book movies. So there you go. So any thoughts about the cast, or
I mean,
other than what we said?
Other than what I've said earlier, I do think Gina Rowlands does a great job of like portraying that character.
Yeah.
Because it definitely spoke to how I read her in the book, of just this very loving, but also like very proud. Like, she's proud of her country. But she's just hurt. Like, she's genuinely hurt by what is currently going on.
But also very wise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It has experienced a lot.
And it like clearly loves Marjane, but is very quick to call her out when she's done something wrong, which she does several times throughout the story.
Yes. And I did find it interesting. We watched it with the English version, but we also had the subtitles on.
Right.
And the number of times that they didn't match up, which I sometimes get because it depends on the way the translations happen. But I did find it interesting that the subtitles sometimes would have, like, for instance, you're talking about the grandmother calling Marjane by an inappropriate name.
Yeah.
But yet the English dubbed version would not use that name.
Right.
They would just say, like, you're a horrible girl.
Yeah.
Instead of using the profane name that the subtitles were indicating. So I don't think there's much more to talk about until we're actually talking about the story. So let's go ahead and get into whether this is a watch it or read it. So should someone who hasn't seen this watch it, or should they read the comic instead? And I'll let you decide first, Bethany.
Well, you know what my answer always is.
Yes, they got to read it.
You should read it.
Yeah.
If you're really wanting to delve into the story and get a much richer history, you're wanting to get the full story, you need to read it. If you're only like vaguely interested, the movie does a very good job because, like you said earlier, it's directed by the woman who wrote it and, illustrated the graphic novel. And so it's a very true adaptation. You get to the heart of it, but I do feel like they have to rush through a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so there are parts of it where it might not be as impactful as it is for when you read it. And there are also parts where you go like, wait, what? Because without having the backstory or the history.
In certain context.
Yes,
Yeah.
the context. And I also feel like it could be a translation issue because, we're watching, obviously the graphic novel's translated, but they can take the time to translate and they're not as worried about it fitting a certain timing. Whereas, in the movie, it's got to match the timing of the French translation.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
And so you get more of an in-depth description, an in-depth story, as opposed to having to just like quickly fit something in so that you can get it to match what was said in French.
Yeah. No, I agree. I will admit I have not read the entire graphic novel.
Because it's dense.
Because it's very dense. But I will say I think you should start with the graphic novel. Because, I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Bethany said. It allows you to experience Marjane's story in its most personal form. Mm-hmm. It is a lengthy read. This is, when we say graphic novel, we are talking about a novel. Like, this is the size of a typical fictional novel.
Right.
It's just in comic book form with the panels. So it is lengthy, but again, like Bethany said, it gives you time to connect to Marjane's world. Which, again, the movie kind of, goes through kind of quickly. A good adaptation, but just goes through it pretty quickly. The art alone, whether you're talking about the comic book or the movie, because it's roughly the same art, the art does allow you to focus on the
words.
Well, the emotional weight
Right.
of the story. Like I talked about earlier with, things not actually being black and white, but it's presented in black and white. But through the comic, through the graphic novel, you get to experience that without, kind of like what you're saying, without that distraction of the animation, mm-hmm. without the distraction of the voice acting. You get to take your time to process right. what is being said and what is happening.
You can take a moment when a thing has happened. You can take a moment to digest what you have just heard or read before it just immediately moves on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, because it allows you to explore a lot of the... the movie's all about the culture of Iran. It's about the identity of this woman, from a young girl into adulthood. It's
her history,
yeah,
like her family history.
Yeah, and even the revolution itself. We get to explore all of that in much greater depth through the graphic novel, which of course will give you, as we said, a richer understanding of it before you see the movie. There's one element, which I'll just go ahead and say it because it's very early. There's one element where in the movie, Marjane does throw out a line about talking to God, but then later we see God show up. And honestly, I'm sitting there and I even turned to Bethany and I said, if I didn't know that that's what that was from reading the graphic novel, I think I would have been confused.
Right. It doesn't explicitly say, like, this is me talking to God now. Or she doesn't say, like, hey, God, what's up? It's just, there's this big white being that appears and he talks to her and he tries to, assure her.
Yeah.
And then it moves on.
Yeah. All right. So there you have it. Again, if you can get a hold of the graphic novel, which you pretty much have to get a physical copy. There's not a lot of ways to find it digitally. And then get a hold of the movie, which I also don't think is streaming anywhere. So you probably also have to get a hold of a digital copy.
If you're friends with us, we own it. So.
Now it's time for a commercial.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, so let's take a trip around the spinner rack and talk about certain aspects of this movie. So the first thing I want to ask, Bethany, is for your speech bubble. So not some really, wonderful quotes out of this, but I was curious to see if you could find a quote that you liked out of this movie.
It's really tough. Basically anything the grandmother says when she's talking to Marjane, she goes back and forth from being just very loving and affectionate to being very harsh and honest with her. I can't think of anything specific. The only thing that really jumps out to me right now is really dumb, but it's when Marjane is like walking down this road to try to buy like a black market cassette, and all of the people are being like, Bee Gees. Yeah. And then one guy goes, Jekyll Maxon.
Yeah.
And that just tickled me to no end. So Jekyll Maxon is my quote right now.
Well, I went a little bit more deep with the quote.
Good.
Mine was, in life, you'll meet a lot of people who say, I know who you are, but they don't. No one really knows anyone.
Yeah.
So there you go. Because that, to me, that kind of sums up her story in this story. So I thought that was a really good one. Which
is really fascinating because it's her trying to tell the story to the world of herself. Mm-hmm. And yet she's saying, you still don't know me.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Moving on to our moving panel. So this is where we talk about a scene that we think just jumps right off the page. Again, this was such a true adaptation. Every scene is pretty much right off the page. So in essence, we're talking about maybe what our favorite scene was. So What was it for you, Bethany?
Oh, boy. So one of the scenes I really like, I don't know if like is a good word. A scene that I find very powerful because it is in both the graphic novel and in the movie. It's when they're starting to show images of like violent protests.
Yeah.
And it shows, all the people, they're very featureless. They're like silhouettes. But you still see one person who looks very young, gets shot and you watch him bleed. And basically his blood kind of takes over the screen. And it's a very powerful moment. And I feel like it was, and then you learn and you find out that her parents were a part of that protest.
Yeah.
And that, the guards were freely shooting into the crowds. And just how scary and wild it is to think that happens in their home, basically, in their neighborhood, that she experienced this.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I've got a different scene I wanted to talk about, but it's kind of like the scene where she wakes up and the air raid is happening. Just the thought of waking up to that. But I did on this case went a little bit more went more on the humor side. I did like the scene where Marjane gets stopped by the two women for her clothes, her outfit with the shoes, the punk rock shoes.
And there were like Nike.
They're Nikes. and then her jacket that she made. And then she also, there's a Michael Jackson reference where they point to the buttons. That's Michael Jackson. And she's trying to explain how it's not. She's just trying to get away from them. And I enjoyed
it's
that
funny.
scene. Yeah.
It's very cute. It's also very like teenager.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That scene is very universal.
Right.
To what a lot of people probably experience.
Now, granted, the stakes were a lot higher for her than us. But it is that moment of like when you're young, you try to push the boundaries and to see what you can get away with. And then when you get caught, you try to backpedal as much as you can.
Yeah. All right. This next thing I'm going to call Twisted History, since this is based off of real events. So this movie covers major historical events. It covers the Islamic Revolution. There's the Iran-Iraq War. So I have a question. How did the film make these events accessible to someone like us who may not be familiar with the details of Iranian history?
I mean, it made it so that I kind of, now granted, I still don't understand things on a large scale.
Yeah.
But it does give you this idea that it happened recently and it happened quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, because it starts in 1978 and they seem to be living how Americans lived in the 1970s. They had parties, they drank, they walked around in clothes that were popular in the 70s. Like, it's all seemed very modern and normal. And then within 4 years, everything changed.
Yeah. But I like that with the Islamic Revolution, with the war, I think it made it more accessible by focusing on the personal experiences.
Right.
Or the way Marjane's family was having to live through it, rather than overwhelming us with just information and history and the political views and all that, without making that too much of the story to where it would have been more of a political story, to make it more personal.
It really, it just tells the story of a family.
Yeah.
Who is living through a huge political change.
Yes.
Where their country is just completely changing. And it's more about the families.
Yes.
And how they are affected than the politics.
Yeah. And it allows us to see the emotional and social impact that it had on just everyday people.
Right.
Yeah. And then having Marjane narrate it as it goes along, I think that helps, though, at times, it helps clarify some of the more complex situations. There's early on in the film where they have to explain the Shah, and so they do a little like flashback storytelling to explain who the Shah was, how he came into power, and pretty much just very briefly the Shah's run of power. But then it also, even through that story, it keeps its humor,
right?
And it keeps it, gives it a very I'm trying to think of the word, but the best I can think of, it keeps it very human.
It keeps it approachable.
Yeah, that's a better word. Instead of making it too heavy. Because there's even, I forgot what she says. There's even during
he's
that.
An idiot.
Yeah, and then they have the characters turn and face the camera. And like, huh? Yeah. So, to keep that humor in there while you're telling such a political and historical story.
Well, it makes sense that scene is so, like I said, approachable because he's explaining it to his child.
Yeah. Yeah. So it allows so Marjane Satrapi.
Yes.
It allows her to give us all of this history and show us the significance of all of this without just being so deep that it becomes like a chore or it becomes
homework or history class.
Yeah, it becomes boring. She did a great job with it.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's move on to a little bit more of a fun side of this. We're going to call this What If? And let's talk about what if it had a soundtrack. Now, of course, there is some music that plays in the movie. There is a great musical number.
Yeah.
Where she sings "Eye of the Tiger."
Yes, that is true.
But let's talk about what if Persepolis had a soundtrack. What song we're gonna hone in here? What song would you think would perfectly represent Marjane and her rebellious spirit?
So, especially towards the beginning of the movie, she is very much just a young woman who just wants to be a kid and just wants to have fun and just wants to live a teen life without the restrictions of a very oppressive government. And I don't think it goes much deeper than that. It's very like self-focused in that time, which is, appropriate for a teenager. And so I would love to be one of those people that knows punk rock songs. I'm not.
Yeah.
But I do know one song that I feel like would fit, and I'm going to say Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper.
Okay, I can see that. I went with the side of Marjane where she, like we've talked about, she was very defiant with a lot of things. She ultimately refuses to conform. She does what she has to do to not get in trouble. But so I decided to go with something that was probably a little bit more in the time. Not that your song wasn't, but like for instance, they talk about her being interested in the Bee Gees, but it's already into the 80s. So that the music is a little behind.
Delayed.
Yeah, a little delayed. Although she does get Michael Jackson. But so I went with Bad Reputation by Joan Jett.
Very good.
I mean, to me, that would be a great anthem for Marjane.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I like it.
All right. Let's also talk about what if they made a live action movie. I really hope they don't and never do, but it's just fun to talk about. So let's say they made a live action movie. Who would you cast as Marjane?
Okay. So I said earlier, I would like if they were to ever revisit the story, either live action or if they were to just re-record voices for the animated, I feel like it would be a good idea to actually showcase some Iranian actors. I don't really know any Iranian actors. I tried to Google and I was like, this is just going to be me Googling a list and naming off names. So instead of like giving a specific name, I am saying I would like for them to showcase actors from Iran. I know there was a list. There was a big long list of the best actors from Iran, and one of those people. But that is what I feel like would really make this story a lot more personal. Not saying, Gina Rollins and Sean Penn didn't do a great job, but to get a perspective from people who have lived through a lot of what happened through the story, I feel like would be an additional powerful edge to this story.
Yeah, and it is different when you're talking about a voice cast versus a live action cast, because you probably can get away with a little bit more with a voice cast. But I don't disagree with you that I think it should be an actual Iranian actress that plays Marjane. But in light of not knowing any, and to answer this question, I went Zendaya. Again, I think she could play her both as, not obviously as a child, but once she hits teen, and even going into her adulthood, it could be Zendaya the entire time. I think Zendaya displays that confidence and that rebellious nature.
I'm not saying she doesn't have the, vibes. She's definitely got those vibes. I will say I feel like Marjane is a much bigger, she's a lot more silly than I think. I feel like Zendaya usually takes herself pretty seriously and stuff. Like, what her Mary Jane is very, she is cool. Marjane wants to be cool.
Yeah, but I don't know. It could happen.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to happen. But it could happen. Yeah. All right, let's go back in time. So, if you could have a conversation with Marjane at any point in the story, what advice would you give her, or what would you want to ask her?
So there is a moment in it's about the middle of the story where her parents send her away to, at first France, and then she ends up in Vienna, to get her out of Iran, because it's dangerous. It's not safe for her to be there anymore. And that's just the best thing they know to do. And she's pretty much alone, just on her own. And she lives with a woman who is constantly accusing her of stealing. And then she's dating this guy that she's super in love with. And then he cheats on her. And she's just in a very dark place. And all things, it all culminates to this perfect moment where she just storms out of the apartment that she's been living in and lives on the street for 2 months. And I feel like if I were able to go back in time, and I would just like to provide some kind of comfort at that time, because that had to be awful. Just being completely isolated from everything you've ever known. Feel alone. Literally everyone hates you. Just the people you think love you, you can't trust them. And the people who are supposed to take care of you don't. And the people who you love are too far away to help. And I would just like to be there to provide some sort of comfort and just a listening ear, and give her space, and like I said, just comfort. My heart just broke for her during that period.
Yeah, I think honestly, I would like to ask Marjane today, how she remained so strong in the face of everything that she experienced. Mm-hmm. How did she balance her love for her Iranian heritage with her curiosity for Western life? Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Just how did she maintain a drive with all that she experienced, especially when she was on her own like that? In terms of advice, I would probably tell her to, not even just tell her, part of me thinks my advice is more something she would tell us, is trust in your journey, even when things don't make sense and you feel out of place. And to lean on family. There's a lot of love and strength in those relationships. The moment she has when she's a child with her Uncle Anush in the prison, when he only got to have one visitor and he chose it to be her. And as soon as she enters, he starts dancing with her. And because even when things seem hard, it is those relationships that honestly may be what gave her her strength. So yeah, there you have it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much to talk about here. This is one that you more have to experience than listen to us talk about it.
Right.
But we'll go ahead and get into our final decision: bag it, stack it, or trade it. So Bethany, what say you?
This is a really hard one because on one hand, I feel like it holds a lot of historical significance. I feel like it's a powerful story. It could really truly help people in different stages of their lives, not just people who are living in political unrest, but people who are struggling, who feel disconnected and feel isolated. People who have chosen a path for themselves and realize it's not what they want. And there's just a lot of things she overcomes. But at the same time, it is so dense.
Yeah.
That it is definitely not something I will read again soon. I'm not saying I'll never read it again, but or watch again. Yeah. But I will say it will be a while.
Yeah.
So, what does that equal when you average those two ideas together?
Well, not to decide for you, but you're giving a lot of the argument I'm going to give, and I'm giving it a stack it.
Okay. Well, I want to bag it. Yeah. And it is because I do feel like, and hear me out, because if you bag something, you can't read it again. It's harder to read.
Well, yeah, it's not that you can't read it again. It's just you cherish it and you don't want to mess it up. And yeah, it's not like getting it graded, which I didn't make one of the things. And that's where you get sealed up and it can never be touched again. So.
I'm gonna say bag it just because I do feel like it is something that I would recommend people read. It is something. Now, I would give all the trigger warnings and the caveats and the things that we have mentioned throughout this story, but also like it's such a significant story. It's very powerful. It is something you have to dedicate time to.
Absolutely.
And for that reason, I'm gonna bag it.
Okay.
With the caveat, knowing that it's going to be something I put up on a shelf and say, like, this is an important thing.
Yeah.
I just can't come back to it for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. That, again, for a lot of the same reasons, I did go with stack it. Because like you said, I mean, it's deep, but some of that emotional depth does stay with you and gets you thinking about stuff.
It's like Where the Wind Blows. It's one of those things where it's a beautiful story. It's powerful. It's deep. I just can't do that to myself again anytime soon.
Yeah, it's not something, this is not a movie, or even if you're talking about the graphic novel, that you're going to want to return to over and over again. But like Bethany said, I think you will go back to it after you've thought about it some more. Maybe you've done a little bit more historical research and all that.
Maybe something changes historically.
Yeah, and so you may come back to it so you can discover something new that you didn't pick up on the last time. So yeah, so that leaves it as a stack it for me, because I think bag it needs to have a little bit more of that enjoyment and rewatchability to make it that, but. Let's talk about some recommendations. So maybe another movie, maybe another graphic novel, or I'll even just say a novel that you either think is a good companion piece to this, goes along with it, or maybe something that maybe could be a palate cleanser compared to considering how deep this is.
Right.
So what do you have as a recommendation?
So I guess my recommendation, I can say a graphic novel that I feel like kind of goes, it's a different story. It's a different tale. It's still a dense graphic novel that is kind of autobiographical. And I'm going to say Fun Home. It is the story of Alison Bechdel, the relationship that she had with her father. And there is a Broadway musical that is based on Fun Home. It is very dense. It's a very powerful story. It's a lot shorter than Persepolis, but it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I decided to go with something that was more on the same lines of Persepolis, and that was to go with something that is both it was not a graphic novel, but it is a novel that was turned into a movie, and that's The Kite Runner.
Oh man,
that's
Afghanistan, but it also still
it like I said, very similar.
Yeah, that one's a rough one.
But it also not only focuses on the national history, but the personal, identity that it develops. And it also deals with family, and it deals with exile and the cultural heritage, just like Persepolis does. And just like with Persepolis, Kite Runner shows how political forces affect who you are as a person when you live in that type of environment. And so, and I know a lot of people probably are more familiar with The Kite Runner because I know it used to be a required read in school.
It wasn't for me. It was new when it came out for like when I was in school.
Yeah.
But it was something I read when it was a new like best-selling author.
I mean, it may not have been. I just know as a high school teacher, I have seen a lot of students read it.
Great.
So I don't know if it's just the interest in it or if it actually is required reading. I did find out that they do talk about Persepolis in their English class, that it's actually in their textbook to talk about. So yeah, so The Kite Runner would be my recommendation. If you enjoyed Persepolis and are interested in that type of story, I would say the Kite Runner.
Or if you enjoyed one of our recommendations and you go like, well, maybe I would like Persepolis.
True. Which
I think you would. It's a good story.
All right, so we'll wrap it up there. Like I said, probably a shorter episode, but again, this is one. It's only an hour-and-a-half movie. It's much longer graphic novel, but this is something you truly do have to experience more than be told about. Because no matter how in-depth Bethany and I try to get telling you about it, it still isn't the same.
Well, because it's not really about what happens.
Yes.
It's how she responds to it and how it affects her family. And that you're not going to get from a summary.
No. So go out and see Persepolis or go out and read Persepolis and you get to experience for yourself. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Happy birthday, Bethany.
Thanks.
So yes, such a lovely high point movie to discuss here for your birthday. But an important one to discuss and one that many people have probably never heard of. So this at least puts it out there for people who may not have been familiar to now look into it.
Yeah, when it was a new movie coming out, I just remembered seeing all the things and going like, well, I'm interested in that. Let's learn about it.
Yep. All right, so there you have it, and we will go ahead and wrap things up. For today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.